Hello, and welcome to The Fool and the Philosopher.
The Philosopher and The Fool.
So last time we ended on quite a negative note, of Canada and the state of what was the democracy, in theory. I'm not sure if it ever was, because if you test the boundaries and find they exist, then they might have always been there.
Yeah. And
I think that might be true of most or all democracies around the world. I think if you push too far, you might be surprised at you are free as long as you do what the people want you to do, who have the monopoly on force, essentially. And that's why Americans are so obsessed with the Second Amendment, keeping their guns. But I'm not sure about that. Like, I don't think Americans realize that Canadians and Australians, for example, Australians especially, who have quite strict gun laws, and Brits have quite strict gun laws. Canadians don't actually have quite strict gun laws, but all three of those countries, anyone can still own a gun.
Yeah.
It's just there's more regulations in place, and there's not a culture of carrying your weapons around with you.
In fact, guess which country has the second most guns per people in the world?
Besides the States, you mean?
Yeah.
Mexico or Canada, I guess.
Canada.
Yeah.
We have a ton of guns.
Yeah, well...
So the United States has something like 3 guns per people?
3 per person?
Or yeah, it's more guns than people.
Wow.
But Canada has about...
Does that include military?
No.
Oh,
This is personal guns I talk about. This is purely personal guns. So Canada has, I think, 2 guns for every 3 people.
Wow. Yeah, well, I mean, our neighbors over there, I think each person there has at least 2 to 3 guns in the household. And there's 2 people in the household now, but when there was 4 of them, I think all the kids had a gun each, at least. My friend who lives there, he has 2. And then the dad has a couple, and I doubt the mom would have less than 1, probably 2.
Yeah, we have several firearms here.
Yeah, we don't have many here, actually. We only have 1 or 2.
We have a low caliber and a mid.
Yeah. We don't have many here, but we do have them. Like, I think every single person that lives in this community owns at least 1 gun per household. I would be surprised for a household to not have a gun.
Yeah.
There's probably the occasional exception, but by and large, I think everyone has one. That mostly for squirrels.
Yeah.
But also, a lot of people are hunters around here.
Yeah. Also, you have at least one neighbor you can call to.
Yeah.
Scare off a big animal.
Well, there's a lot of farms around here too, so if you're a farmer, you need a gun for coyotes and whatnot, just to make noise, even. But I think that just lets you fight the government. I don't think that lets you have a democracy necessarily, because you have to be willing to fight. And there's more than that. You don't want, like, a civil war is horrible, absolutely horrible. Yeah. And fighting the government isn't exactly a civil war, but it's an uprising, I guess. But it's similar. What you need, I think, is something more like France, where they don't have a Second Amendment that I'm aware of. I've never heard of France being noted for its guns. I have no idea what the situation is there.
They're noted for their giant sharp blades in one structures.
Well, that's the thing. The politicians in France are actually afraid of their people.
Yeah.
And I think that might be what is necessary for a democracy. But it's quite sad, because France is not a very stable country.
No.
If you look at the stable countries on Earth, they are the more dictatorial, like, monarchies, especially.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to think, the most stable country on Earth. We talked about this previously, and I was right. It is the United States.
Yeah.
Or the Netherlands, something like that. But there's not, and that's not saying much. Like, the United States is 300 years old.
Yeah.
So the stability of, well, it's less. It's like 2.5, I think, 100. But there's not very many stable countries out there. And the United States, I guess, is a democracy in a sense. But they...
300 years old, they've gone through 1 civil war.
Yeah, so even then, they're still the same country, but even then they had the Civil War. Yeah. So if you discount civil wars, probably still the United States.
Yeah.
Like after the Civil War.
It's had a pretty long run.
I'd say the Netherlands would be up there. At that point, though, it gets so shallow that everyone's there, like Canada, France,
the UK is pretty civil. Like, when was their last big hoo-ha within their own system?
Well, they had the end of the empire, which was at the end of World War One, so 1918.
But wasn't the end of the empire more of them saying sod it, or was it a bit of more rebellion?
Well, you had like Gandhi,
Gandhi,
who overthrew India, and you had, I mean, even recently you had pushback in Barbados. I don't remember. Just like last year, they lost the country.
Yeah,
that was quite peaceful though. They had representatives from the royal family over there. And so yeah, the empire end, but that was a fairly peaceful affair. I mean, like Gandhi's revolution was peaceful. That was kind of the thing.
Yeah.
But the leaving of Africa, especially of all the countries there, caused huge amounts of chaos. France, I don't think France has had a revolution for a while.
They had a revolution during World War II.
Oh yeah, well I guess they had Kiesling give the government over to the Nazis.
Yeah.
So I guess there's that. Yeah, Spain definitely not. Spain.
There's also a revolution, I think, in between World War One and World War Two, and there's a revolution in France before World War One.
That was kind of the period of revolutions, right? Like the end of the 1800s, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then I mean, Spain had a massive one.
Spain had a civil war.
Yeah.
During World War Two.
Oh, revolution is you sort of fight back against your government, isn't it?
Yeah, but Spain had a civil war.
Yeah.
They had
fascists versus communists, basically.
I think it's fascists versus Democrats.
Oh, okay.
The fascists won, but they stayed neutral, is from what I remember.
Yeah.
But right now they have a monarchy, so I don't know how that happened.
Reestablished.
I guess, yeah. San Marino, I guess, technically has been around a very long time, but they haven't been their own country a lot of the time. They get, like, the reason they survived a huge amount of the 19th century was Napoleon was friends with the head of San Marino. And so he said, hey, just be our vassal and we'll take care of you, basically.
Yeah. And
so, and they did the same with Italians, and they did the same with the Romans, and San Marino's just been everyone's best friend for
Japan is basically a vassal
of the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like ever since World War II, they've been a vassal.
And
there's a very big revolution before that.
So I was going back, like Canada does. So actually, well, no, it is an interesting conversation though to continue. The democracy is very new, obviously.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem very stable so far. And with the exception of the Netherlands, I'd have to check their history because I know they're the oldest capitalist society on Earth,
yeah.
And they tend to do things differently and
money, my dear boy.
But they keep it. They make it work.
Yeah.
Which is something that most people haven't managed. Like capitalism, people talk about. You hear a lot about late stage capitalism these days, but all of the countries, like if you look at second place, for how long it's had capitalism, it's like half of how long the Netherlands has done it. So,
well, maybe it's because capitalism the Netherlands have an enemy that other people don't.
The sea.
Yes.
To unite them. But, I mean, that probably is true to an extent.
And also, they're really flat. You can't, if you can't live on the hill, a windmill's going on the hill, so your neighbor doesn't live on the house on the hill. They live on the flat bit because the hill's taken up by the windmill.
But the Netherlands has shown you can do it for at least 450 years, something like that. Yeah. Whereas a place like the United States, if you go back to the founding of the United States, let's say 1776, I think, they have maybe been capitalist since then, but that's only 250 years. Mm-hmm. So they are nowhere near late stage capitalism. Netherlands, you could argue, is late stage capitalism, but they've been doing the same thing for centuries, and it's worked.
What is late stage capitalism? Is it basically when capitalism falls apart or something because one person has all the money?
So the criticism is that it becomes all about your shareholders and your wealth. You don't care about the individuals, the people anymore. It's all about advertising. It's all about getting the most money out of people that you can from, which is a very materialist view of, and so you could criticize the capitalists of being materialist, which is kind of funny because that's what Marxism is. Yeah. And it's hard to have so an alternative to capitalism could be a barter economy.
Yeah. United States and Canada aren't really even all that capitalist because we do have social programs.
I don't think that would... The United States has way less social programs. it's actually surprising how
different.
Yeah, I'm like, well, it doesn't surprise me so much that they don't have like healthcare, let's say.
Yeah.
But they're one of the only countries on Earth that don't. Like, they're actually kind of unique.
Well, I recently saw a joke on that. It was Americans sick in, I think it's Korea.
Yeah.
And he goes to the doctor, he's got broken arms. Like, the doctor's like, so you need some x-rays? And he's like, yeah, I need some x-rays. All right, that'll be $4,000. Nope, just $4. Like, all right, and okay, we're going to need to like set your arm and go through it. That'll be $70,000. Nope, just $7. All right, and the cast material's a little bit expensive. This one's going to cost you a bit. It's going to be $30 million. Nope, just $30.
So that is one of the criticisms of this late stage capitalism idea, is you look at a place like France or apparently South Korea, and you have to pay for medical care there.
Yeah.
In France, it's a 2-stage system, so you can get free healthcare, but you have to wait forever.
Yeah.
Or you can pay for it and you get service right away. And I actually think France has one of the better systems on Earth, but it's an unequal system, which is why people don't like it.
Yeah.
But I say, why make everyone... Why not, instead of making everyone suffer equally, why not at least allow those who can afford it not to suffer? Even if I'm not one of those people, why do I have to force the rich people to suffer because I'm suffering? That seems really messed up. So I quite like France's system. But
we have a bit of a private practice.
Not really. We actually have some massive issues. You're not allowed to go outside the government in certain circumstances.
Really?
So our grandmother, for example, is blind now because of medical mistreatment. And why she was mistreated medically was she was given an eye injection for a different problem that was contaminated. And why it was... But this risk of contamination is very low.
Yeah.
However, there is something that costs like 2 to 10 times as much that has no risk of contamination. A very similar injection. But they took the cheap one because it's socialized and they don't want to spend a bunch of money. Our grandma isn't a rich person, but it's not that much, like, you know, not 10
more.
It's like, well, it's expensive, right? But let's say you have to spend like $1,000 or $10,000 a year on these injections to not go blind. It's like, look, I'll cut back on my meals. I'm willing to pay to not be blind.
Yeah.
I'll scrape together the money. I'll do fundraisers. I'll ask friends and family for help, whatever it is, even if it's $10,000 extra a year or something like that. And I think it's something like it would cost her $2,000 a year. It was something like that. But they don't give you the option, like, hey, do you want the cheap, slightly risky one, or do you want the not risky one? And so this is actually a big malpractice suit that's going on in British Columbia right now, it was. I don't know where that's going on. That was a couple of years ago.
Class action lawsuits and malpractice take years.
Yeah, and it's tricky because, well, so there's another issue with socialized healthcare, which is that with a pandemic, it becomes very obvious that they are saying we have to flatten the curve.
Yeah.
And you say, well, I want to take the risk for myself. I look, I don't want to put anyone at risk, but I'm going to take my own risks and I'm going to go out and I'm going to still party, whatever it might be. But the problem with socialized healthcare is you become a drain on the system to everyone else.
Yeah.
And then, so the government, therefore, either has to allow people to completely abuse the system and put themselves in danger and then pay for their mistakes.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, I'm going to jump off cliffs until I break a leg, but the government will pay for it. It's fine. Or they have to suddenly restrict what their citizens can do in order to... or they start putting out rules like, all right, if you smoke, we don't give you healthcare. If you don't wear a mask when you enter a store, we don't give you healthcare. So socialized healthcare does lead to a necessary form of tyranny, or it becomes... At the very least, it builds a lot of resentment among people because my uncle died because he couldn't get a heart surgery because this idiot decided he would just go jumping off cliffs, something like that, and break a leg and take up a hospital spot that someone that actually, who did everything right and still got unlucky, needed. And then it gets very weird because you can't really prove cause and effect in most cases. So you'd say, well, smoking, we can't actually 100% confirm causes lung cancer, so can we ban smoking? And then you're just making these judgment calls and you mess up. So, but the interesting thing about places like South Korea and France when it comes to healthcare is that it's not expensive. The United States, and this is the criticism of the late stage capitalism. Yeah. There is a massive amount of inefficiency and corruption in the United States.
Yeah.
Which the insurance companies and the medical providers are either in cahoots, or the medical providers are completely screwing over the insurance companies.
Yeah.
And they make the costs unbelievably high, like way higher than they should be. And it causes
people to run away from ambulances when they're clearly injured.
Yeah, because ambulance, it costs something like $10,000 or more, I think, to get an ambulance ride. Maybe it's only like $3,000, but it's a lot. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't reflect the real value at all. But because they can make people pay it, they do.
Yeah.
However, this is more of a criticism. What people think they're criticizing capitalism, what they tend to be criticizing is a more corporatist structure, where corporations become the government, corporations become God, and what causes that, funnily enough, is actually government. So every safety regulation you introduce, every health regulation you introduce, every environmental regulation you reduce, whatever it is, that is something that a giant company can easily pay. So let's say you have to start up a health clinic. You need to pay for a $10,000 inspection for government officials to inspect you for 1 year. Then you're allowed to open your health practice. Yeah. That if you introduce that law, you're like, oh yeah, this is great. You know, we don't want just any quack starting up a health service. What that does is it means a multi-billion-dollar health company. It doesn't change how they operate because they can pay that no problem. But no competition can emerge to destabilize the system. So you have regulation in the wrong areas can allow for monopolies, government-caused monopolies. Now, that isn't to say monopolies don't exist free of governmental regulation, which I think is something more libertarian types might... Well, they probably admit it for the most part, but because there's a very famous example in history, which is the guild system.
Yeah.
And the guilds operated like a cross between a corporate monopoly and a mafia. Yeah. You're not allowed to operate in our town, sort of thing. Yeah. And so having regulations to prevent that, you can see a benefit to it.
There was a bit of a joke. I think Terry Pratchett talked about the concept of the Thieves Guild and the Assassins Guild, and they had the Musicians Guild, and how the Musicians Guild was actually, and the Musicians Guild and the Fools Guild were actually nastier than the Assassins Guild and the Thieves Guild. And just how awful some of the guilds were.
Well, that's because the Musicians and Fools Guild, unregulated humor and performance, they cracked down on.
Yeah.
Whereas the Thieves and Assassins Guild prevented murder and theft in the city.
Yeah.
Because they had a monopoly on murder and theft. Yeah. And so anyone murdering or thieving without a license, they cracked down on. Which is actually how organized crime operates. It does tend to lower crime to a degree.
So in Egypt... There's this...
which is how the mafia formed.
In Egypt, there is
and the Yakuza.
Bigger organization. So Egypt, you will find in some of the major cities that there's about one beggar per zone. So it's not like, oh, there's a ton of people all along the street. There's one guy, because that's his spot. And they will chase other people out. And so they have organized... begging in Egyptian cities.
And is this like a beggars guild? Or
it's a beggars guild, basically. They used to for a while. Don't know if it's still like that. But a lot of those beggars are actually quite wealthy people as well. And it's just this really weird thing in Egypt of organized begging.
So we ended last time with quite a bit of fear.
Yeah.
And
uncertainty.
And I do think that Canada, until proven otherwise, is no longer democratic.
Yeah.
Because unless we can have another mass scale protest that drastically engenders change and it isn't stopped, then we live in a dictatorship to some extent. And we don't live in an honest dictatorship either. Yeah. We live in...
Canada's been called an elected dictatorship.
And the weird thing is, I don't know... I'm trying to think of a parallel. Like China would probably be the closest, where it's a soft dictatorship. You're allowed to say whatever you want, but you get ostracized, you get pushed around, you lose privileges, you lose money. And so it's kind of a great system from a governmental standpoint, because people can, like, China is a very strange country, and Canada, I guess. There isn't many restrictions on what you can do or say in China, as opposed to a country like Russia or North Korea.
Yeah.
So Russia just recently is trying to, or did pass a law that makes it so you can be put in prison for up to 15 years if you publish fake news, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
Because what that means, I don't actually know how anyone would continue doing the news. Like, even if you're like, I'm going to lick the government's heel, I love everything Putin does, it's like, I'm still not going to risk it.
Do you know about the colonialist news media? They were terrified, and they fell apart. And even when a state run, so at one point, this was a change between two of the leaders. So after what's his face died, the guy
Stalin.
Yeah. So that long lasting succession.
Yeah.
So the news media was basically in constant flux at that point in Russia, and they published one thing that they're basically told by the leader publish. And they got assassinated, and the new guy took over. Who assassinated him, most likely? And that guy said, "What you just published is wrong. You're all going to prison."
Yeah, so even if you do everything that they say, the next leader might not like it.
Yeah.
But let's say even you do everything the leader says and the leadership never changes. If you slip up, you are technically liable for 15 years. Now, because you've been such a good citizen and the leader likes you, they'll probably forgive you. But they have the power to put you in prison for 15 years. And that's the scary part. It's not if they will, it's the potential. It's very scary. And so you just stop saying anything at all. But in a place like China, you're actually allowed to, as far as I'm aware, basically say whatever you want. Basically do whatever you want, with a couple exceptions, which are not promoting cults. And, well, that's about the only one I know about, actually.
Criticization of the government.
I think you can do that. I'm pretty sure that's allowed. Like,
accusations of malpractice among party members.
You can do that as well. Like, that tennis player did that.
Yeah, and she disappeared for a while.
Yeah, but she wasn't breaking the law.
Yeah.
See, this is what I'm getting at. Is you are allowed to do what you want in China, but you know that the government goons will surround your family for the next couple of months. Your bank account will be frozen. You'll be like Shu, where he has to wear clown makeup wherever he travels around the country, and he's not allowed to take planes or he has to take trains everywhere.
Yeah.
And he's like legally required to wear clown makeup. He can't use vending machines. He can't use bank accounts so he has to. I think he has to carry all his cash with him or something, which leads to the risk of being robbed. Now, thankfully, he's like a decent MMA fighter. I mean, the whole thing is he's not even actually the best. I was going to say he's like top tier, but he's not. That's kind of the point with Shu, is he's like decent. He's like a mid-tier MMA fighter.
Yeah.
Who can beat any martial arts master on earth. Which is or in China, let's say.
Yeah.
And and that is to say any dogmatic martial arts master.
Yes.
So you look at someone like Peter Ralston. Well, he could beat Peter Ralston easily, I bet.
Yeah, Peter Ralston's an old man with damaged knees.
Yeah, like Peter Ralston's getting on. But Peter Ralston, I think Peter Ralston would be more like an MMA fighter in that he's willing to use what works rather than blindly follow doctrine that might have been misremembered as it got passed down anyways. Yeah. So
what Peter Ralston did,
like, he invented his own martial arts.
Yeah. So it was it's interesting historically. So his martial art was made around the same time as MMA. So MMA took kung fu and I think it was jiu-jitsu and a few other martial arts and turned them into everything that's practical. So stripped them down and turned practical. And there's like a few guys that made MMA. Peter Ralston took Tai Chi, one other martial art, and I think a bit of karate, and stripped them down and took everything that was useful. And so there's the two divergence, but Peter Ralston did his by himself, where the others was a group, and MMA got very popular. Yeah. And Peter Ralston's is basically only taught by him.
Yeah, and I think so it's a similar idea. You take the best of each and you put them together. But I think Peter Ralston managed to keep a bit of the spiritual aspect of martial arts, whereas MMA, I don't think you can train in martial arts without gaining some of that spiritual benefit,
yes.
even if it's a very stripped down form that doesn't ever talk about anything spiritual. Mm-hmm. But
I think training in martial arts will lead to the spiritual.
Just the act of improving yourself and seeing that you can make a difference in the world and you can become stronger through your own actions is a spiritual transformation in of itself. But MMA discarded the, like, you know, here's the special breathing techniques and the mystical chi force and that sort of thing. They're just like, if you hit like this, it hits hard. Don't need to know why.
Yeah.
And whereas Peter Ralston might say, well, you're concentrating chi in your stomach and you're passing it through your...
His is connecting to the earth. It's all about gravity.
And they are probably... I mean, you could probably also do it from a mechanist standpoint of when your whatever bone does this swing, it gets the most motion.
He does actually explain it from that. It's basically, if you're pushing off something, you're going to hit with a bit of its force. Like, if you have a little willow tree and you try to push off it, it's just going to bend. If you push off a building, though, that's a bit of force, right? So his whole process is pushing off the earth, because that's the biggest thing.
Right. So, Canada's got a sneaky sort of tyranny where you're allowed to do anything, but if it goes against the government, you might disappear, your stuff might disappear, you suddenly get declared a terrorist. And so what that means...
investigated by a tribunal.
What that means is none of those things need to ever happen for it to be effective. Yeah. Because now you have the fear of losing everything. And that's how the Chinese system works, is they don't need to enforce their law because the threat of it causes the people to enforce it on themselves. Whereas if you look at Russia's tyranny in some ways is much more honest, because a group of friends might get together and say, I hate this law. Like, why can't we say what we want to say? I hate this. And they might overthrow the government.
Yeah.
Whereas in Canada and China, a group of friends get together and they say, man, we're in a tyranny. It's like, no, we're not. He gave up his power.
Yeah.
But no. It doesn't matter if he gave up his power. Well, yeah, it does, because that means he'll only use it when it's absolutely necessary. And it must have been necessary or he wouldn't have used it. You cause the citizens to totally not unite.
Yeah.
And you cause even the ones who are against the government, like let's say you and I, we're not going to do anything because we're like, well, it's not that bad. Like, it was just a shutdown. It didn't really affect me either way.
Yeah.
It's not like it's going to change my life right now. And so you just tighten the screws just a little bit year by year, and you never get any pushback. And I think the reason China is like that now is because they had literal millennia of trying the top-down sort of thing. And they realized, hey, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
You cause a massive revolution. And I mean, maybe to an extent, people still revolt, because I assume China's been trying this sort of thing for a while at this point.
Yeah.
China has a very interesting dual culture. They have a very strong culture of oppression and adherence to the state and state authority, but they also have a very strong culture of revolt, how to revolt, when to revolt, and what to do about it.
Well, so whenever a natural disaster happens in China, the state media says it's not that bad, only 10 people died. Even when it's thousands dying.
Right, because it's a sign of...
Because the divine law, there's a second part to it I didn't know until I watched this one thing, is if a natural disaster happens, let's say a tsunami kills 1 million people, because China's a lot of people, that means God's saying, you're not doing well, so I'm punishing your country. It's time for a revolution.
Aren't China called a Confucian now, I guess? But, like, the communist China is atheist, right? Like, communism doesn't allow for religion.
Yeah, you can't get rid of the divine law from China.
Huh.
It's the
what's it called? The divine right of heaven? Or
the right of heaven.
Yeah.
Or dictate of heaven. Anyways,
yeah.
They tried to. So much religion was destroyed in China, so many records destroyed. But that thing is something that
mandate of heaven.
Yeah, mandate of heaven. Every single peasant knew the mandate of heaven. Every single official, every person knows it. You tell your kids, this is the mandate of heaven. It's not so, like, to China, it's not so much of, oh, this is a religion. It's a law of nature.
And
so the Chinese government is basically desperate never to let people know that there's a disaster, because that is one of the things for the mandate of heaven to occur, is if the government cannot handle its disasters, then it's time to get rid of it.
Right.
And so, I mean, the way they handle their disasters is don't let people know about them.
Most countries have a similar idea, which is, for example, if a law is unjust, it's your duty to disobey.
Yeah.
But China's is almost the reverse, which is if you disobey and you win, then your disobedience was just.
Yeah. Well, it's the trial by combat.
Yeah, basically, on a massive scale.
Yeah, it's trial by combat judgment of a country. There's an interesting case. I can't remember which country it was, but a guy was accused of murder, and why he was accused of murder is he dueled someone, and he killed them in the duel. And so they said, all right, you're going to have a trial by combat because you killed that guy. And that's basically why you request, like, what's your trial? I said, trial by combat. And so they stacked the odds against him. So as the judge's champion fought him, because that's usually who he was. And judge's champion, very strong, very powerful fighter. And the trial happened basically right then and there. And so they gave him a sword. The judge's guy wearing armor had a sword. This guy is one of the people who's a master at the unarmored combat with a longsword. And so he killed the judge's champion. It's like, oh, well, he's innocent. And there's just sort of point things like, if you give this man trial by combat and even try to stack it against him, he can basically get out of it because he's like one of the better fighters.
Or
it's God's will.
If you stack everything against him, send him in unarmored against a massively armored opponent, and he still manages to win, it must be God's will.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're sort of like, look, we poisoned him, we gave him diarrhea, we didn't let him sleep all night. Now he's dragged into the courtroom. We knocked him over the head a few times. He's dizzy. We didn't give him a sword, and we sent the judge's champion in full plate with a battle axe, and he won. He can go free. So we don't even know how he won. I think the champion just had a heart attack and fell over, but yeah, God's on your side.
Yeah.
So, but in the Chinese case, if you can disadvantage the one guy enough and advantage the other guy enough that the guy with all the advantages wins, that is justice.
Yeah.
Because you were in a position of power in order to be able to give the guy all the advantages in the first place. It's like, well, if God was on your side, you would have worn armor to the fight. I mean, which I think is similar to how trial by combat works. It's like, if you were a just person, you would already be good at combat in this situation. And also, combat isn't, a modern RPG or a JRPG where the higher level person wins. It's very random, even against people of totally different skills.
Well,
so
it can just happen unexpectedly. I remember one of the first times I was wearing armor in a fight, like as a tournament setting. So it was like a team versus team. I was standing there getting ready, I braced myself, and a guy charged me. And the rules are if you're 3 points of contact, you're out. And it's like, oh, I'm going to brace down, get my head down, go and block. He just clotheslined me and I was out. And then the next combat, 2 guys went after me and they got me against a fence. They're trying to drag me down. I grabbed onto the fence and I held those 2 guys up for a good 2 minutes. And that allowed my team to win, even though I lost. And it's completely around. It's just, they weren't expecting me to hold on that long.
And they got tunnel visioned.
Yeah.
They probably should have just left you alone.
Yeah, well, one guy was grabbing my helmet and was choking me. And the other guy was beating me in the back of the calf with a sword. And I just held on. I was like, okay, I have to let go now. But at that point, the rest of their team was out.
This is slightly unrelated, but something that a lot of people that get in fights know this, obviously. But how disorienting being in a fight is.
Oh, my goodness.
So, I am...
Well, Mike Tyson has, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. That's a quote from Mike Tyson.
Yes. So, this is kind of what I want to talk about, actually, is I would say I'm a pretty fast person.
Yeah.
Like, much faster than most people. Not in terms of running. I suck at running. But my reflexes, I think, are quite a bit faster than most people. I could be wrong. But from my experience...
You caught yourself on that one thing when you fell. That was pretty good.
I've done a lot of things like that. And, like, people have thrown eggs out of me unprovoked and I've caught them, that sort of thing. Yeah. Like, from not much further than you to me away.
Yeah.
And I've stopped you from hitting me repeatedly.
Yeah.
So I've been in...
No.
I've been in a lot of fights with you, even. Yeah. And I've managed to defend myself. Which is... the age difference and everything. But I have not much experience with...
fighting? Training?
With proper fighting.
Yeah.
I have almost more experience against, like, berserk, all-out fighting to an extent.
Bar fights?
Yeah.
Bar fighting a midget.
Yeah, basically. Like, against people who, they don't want to kill you, but they're not really holding back because they know they're weaker.
Yeah.
They're enough weaker than you that they don't have to hold back, which is a weird dynamic. So I'm not going to say I'm very experienced at fighting for the most part. But I was in school one day and we had nothing to do in the class. It was metalworking class. And so they decided, well, let's just box. Let's do some boxing. So they got some boxing gloves out. And they got a kid my age named Robin and me to go against each other. Because we were both the smallest people in the class. I was tiny when I was in like grade 9.
Yeah, you were.
When I was very tall when I was in grade 7. And then I didn't grow until I turned like... Well, we'll see when it happens.
It's really funny seeing him amongst... I mean, it's still the case, but when he was that age amongst his friends, as a little kid, like he's standing there, and he's just surrounded by these giants, because most of his friends were quite big.
Yeah, it's... but it's weird because I was taller than everyone when I was 12 years old. Yeah. And then I just stopped growing. Yeah. So that must have been where my health took a dive, obviously, because genetically I probably should be taller than most people. But
you have our mom's genetics as well.
Yeah, I guess.
And her grandfather's.
Yeah, there's a bit of balance. So
literally a family called the Dainties.
Yeah. So
the Welsh Dainties were not known for their stature.
I haven't done much boxing. Yeah. The only martial art I have any formal training in is
archery.
Well, I guess archery, yeah. That'd be the most by far. But I was thinking like bow staff fighting or something. Or like, what do you call that? Not bow staff, sword fighting.
I can't remember its name. But
Katana dueling.
It's very different than that. They actually have completely different rules.
Like a weeb.
The Japanese bamboo sword.
Yeah.
That's its translation, bamboo sword.
Right. And that is quite painful, actually. Like most martial arts.
Well, have you seen the armor that you're actually supposed to wear when you do those duels?
Yeah.
It's tough stuff, and we never wore that.
Yeah. Well, I think most martial arts hurt quite a bit, but the thing, a punch tends to be like a very winding pain that lasts for quite a while.
Yeah.
Whereas a sword blow, it doesn't actually last that long, like but it just hurts so much in the first instant. Yeah. It's like, it's basically, you get cut rather than heavily bruised. Yeah. Essentially, even though they're not sharp, it's just you get hit hard enough with a stick of wood and it's going to break skin. Yeah. Apparently, you're supposed to be wearing like heavy silk, but you know.
Yeah, and pieces of wood.
Yeah. But we weren't going all out anyways. So I have a bit of experience, not much, but a bit. Yeah. This guy I'm fighting, he's titchy. I don't know how much experience he has. And I have to take off my glasses. I was kind of cajoled into it in the first place. I didn't really want to do any boxing.
Taking off your glasses when you depend on them in a fight is nightmarish.
Yeah, so I'm already disoriented, right? Because I'm not wearing my glasses. And so I can barely see my opponent.
Try fighting with one eye closed. That'll also set you off a lot.
So I can barely see my opponent. Yeah. I'm kind of disoriented. There's a ring of people around us. That's disorienting. And I'm thinking, okay, boxing. You know, we're all just kids here in a high school. So we're just gonna follow boxing rules. You know, nothing. You know, above the belt, below the chin type stuff. Yeah. Because this is, you know, I mean, real boxing you hit in the head, but real boxing they wear helmets. And
Cambridge rules.
And also in boxing, it's not between kids during a school day. Yeah. So I'm ready to go. I'm thinking, okay, protect my center of mass here. And he just smacks me in the head. Yeah. And then what happens is it's like, my mind, it's like it starts working at like 1/10 speed. And I'm thinking, okay, hit me in the head. I'll fall back. And then I'll like put my arms up and I'll get him back with a hit. Yeah. So I'm thinking that, right? Yeah. And while I'm thinking that, I get hit in the head like 5 more times because I'm thinking so slow. And it's like you're underwater and you're like, okay, I'm going to take in a breath, but you're still underwater. It's like, okay, I'll take in a breath. You're still underwater because he just kept hitting me in the head. It's like, all I need is half a second to breathe and I'm going to take this guy down. Because I think I can, when he hit me in the head, like I was thinking, I can hit harder than this. I can take him. Yeah. But so I think I could have won that, right? If I had gotten the first hit. But he did. Yeah. And you can't make space for yourself. Yeah. Like, obviously, someone with any training probably knows how to make space for themselves. But if you're new to it, you get hit in the head, and you're like, okay, you can even think in the moment, I'm going to make some space for myself, and then I'm going to take him down. And you just kind of stand there and keep getting hit in the head.
Yeah, and then there's what happens when I get hit in the head, which is I just... you've been hit in the head once. Well, you're dead anyways. so kill them.
But even then, you
Well, I remember that...
if you get a good enough hit to the head...
Yeah.
Remember, this is boxing gloves. This isn't bare fist. So if you got a guy all out with boxing gloves, he can hit pretty hard.
Yeah, well, let me... So, know those foam swords I made? Which, PVC pipe and then insulate and then wrap them in duct tape. So, had those at one point, and I gave one to a guy. We were going to have a duel. And I kind of, like... thought everyone sort of know the rules of these things is you don't hit people in the head with them.
Yeah.
Like, that's sort of established. And another person standing by to count points. And so, it's first to 3 hits. And so we're standing there. And then the guy socks me on the head. And so the person counting points is like, that's 1 point. And then the fight was over. I had 3 points. And the person who had hit me on the head had dropped their sword and was cringing away. Because, like, once he hit me in the head... all bets were off in holding back.
Right, there's also... So, you get hit on the top of the head, it hurts. You get hit on the side of the head.
Yeah, you're disoriented a lot. Yeah, no, I know that because when I got hit in the side of the head by a hellbeard...
Yeah, wearing a helmet.
Yeah, it's wearing a helmet. I stopped.
Yeah.
Everything. Entirely. The person hit me, and we're both having hellbeard. It's a hellbeard duel. And... I sort of just staggered and leaned off, vision went black, and he stopped. And then everyone's just rushing me because in the armored fighting, you really, really don't want people to get injured.
Yeah.
That's why we're all wearing metal armor. And then they took off my helmet and realized that the helmet wasn't put together anymore, and they decommissioned that helmet after that fight.
Well, guy died. New helmet.
It didn't have the proper amount of padding inside it.
That's why humans for wimps. That's why I'm into fluorescent light bulb fights. That's where you get that's real injuries. But yeah, so Canada, not a democracy.
Yes.
And I left on a quite negative note, and I think I failed in the sense of, like I said before, I don't know if I'm overreacting, I don't know if I'm panicking.
Yeah.
And because you know how I had that friend who overreacted when Trump got in, I talked about that. So I think I failed in a sense of not giving you hope, or not being a pillar of I don't know, a pillar of understanding for people to lean on, sort of thing. I left people with the decision of choice, which was I abandoned them essentially. So like a good Hitler, I would like to offer now. I thought about it because I thought I was for still days afterwards. I was like I was saying, like trouble sleeping, upset stomach, trouble digestion, that sort of thing. I was in the shower and I was thinking about it, and I thought very similar to like our very first podcast, where you can be a victim or you can be strong, right? Yeah. But more than that, you can despair about the state of the world and the fact that your country has become a tyranny. Or you can be someone that people look up to for stability. Because I was thinking, I was sort of desperate, like going through YouTube. Like, I need someone to watch that says, okay, calm down. This is what's happening. This is what you do. This is what happens next. I don't need answers of this is exactly what you do step by step. I just need a process. Yeah. I need, what is the moral framework to guide us through this time, right? That's what I wanted.
Well, what's kind of funny about that is when I first started panicking, don't judge the world when your room is dirty.
Yeah.
That actually has a bit more wisdom to it than you think, which is, I have some dishes I could do right now. I'm going to do them. I'm going to make my household as best as I can.
Yes, exactly. So, I couldn't find anyone, right? I was like, okay, there's no... our parents don't seem to know what's going on. Like, they don't understand the significance of the ramifications of this. Like, they don't like it, but they don't understand the incredible depths of the significance of this, I don't think. Less historical background and maybe less paying attention, because it's so ridiculous. Like, it seems like it must be a conspiracy theory, or just it must be overreacting.
Jordan Peterson said, what's easier to believe?
And we talked about that last time too, that the media, the government, the police are all in cohorts and are corrupt, or that a handful of truckers are just crazy. And it's like so easy. And it's like there's no friends I can really talk to that follow this sort of thing. The only friend I have that follows this sort of thing, well, he's a wild card. I have no idea what his take on it would be. But he's not someone and it was also hard for me to talk and communicate, of course. So I was looking like, okay, Jordan Peterson, but Jordan Peterson was just sort of like, this is really bad. And the guy he talked to was like, this is really bad. And Short Fat Otaku was going to do a video on it, but he hasn't released it yet still. People in other countries are saying, oh, this looks kind of bad. Like Tucker Carlson might be the closest I saw to someone that actually understood the situation, funnily enough. But he didn't offer anything. He's just like, oh, look at this bad, left bad sort of thing almost. Yeah. I think that might be too harsh. I think he's actually seems to be a fairly reasonable person from what I've seen, but I haven't seen all of his stuff, and some people think he's really unreasonable, so I don't know. You had like the Lotus Eaters, they're just like, oh, Canada bad, look at this, it's so terrible, it's falling apart, this is what happens when you give up your guns, you got a lot of Americans. I went to Political Compass memes, there was a decent number of people that seemed to understand that Trudeau giving up his powers didn't mean anything. Yeah. But a lot of people on Political Compass memes like, oh, he's like Cincinnatus. He gave up, he stood up when the time was necessary, took the powers, took care of the problem, released them. He's just like his father, like Cincinnatus. No, not in the slightest. His father was wrong. Yeah. His father acted far more reasonably and was still wrong. Yeah. Cincinnatus saved the people from tyranny and gave up all powers permanently.
Yeah. Same with that French guy.
Don't know in that case.
Curse my name?
No, that was Cromwell. That was English.
Was it Cromwell?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cromwell gave up his power.
I'm not sure if he did. He became a tyrant for a couple of years.
Yeah, he became a tyrant, and then he explained why he became a tyrant.
Yes, but he still became a tyrant.
Yeah, but he gave it up after that.
But he didn't keep the power structure which allowed him to become a tyrant in place.
No.
Whereas Trudeau didn't say, okay, I'm giving up my power, and I am going to change the law so that your right to protest is now enshrined in a different way. So, okay, as long as the roads are clear, you can have any protest you want. I've now passed a new law. Or he's like, okay, yeah, I overreacted. I'm sorry. I'm going to change the Emergency Measures Act requirements so that you can't get permission to use it after the fact. You can't get post hoc permission. Because what he did was he actually invoked the powers, used them to invoke a bunch of new laws, then got partial permission to use them, and gave them up before it could pass the Senate. So he never actually got permission to use the powers he used.
Yeah.
And yet their effects still remain.
Yeah.
He didn't say, okay, we're unfreezing. He didn't undo everything. So imagine if he'd done this. Okay, we've taken care of the problem. The roads we were worried about terrorist problem. We can't go into too many details, but we were worried about terrorists. We cleared the roads so that hospital staff could get through. We froze the bank accounts. The crisis has passed. I'm giving up my powers, returning all the bank accounts. I am saying to the protesters, we're going to talk. We're going to let this, now that the issue is dealt with, I'm going to talk to the heads of the protest. I'm going to release all the people that were arrested. He didn't do that. He kept all the people arrested. He kept the bank accounts frozen. I think he started unfreezing them now. Yeah. But he's kept the precedent in place that banks can freeze money.
And there's a police net around the capital right now, and there's zones you have to tell people where you're going in the capital city.
Which is ridiculous, because the whole point was that the truckers were inconvenient to the citizens trying to move around the city as normal. But now there's police doing it, so what's the difference? It's also like, we want people to get back to their normal lives, he said with a horrible smirk. He's awful to watch, I have to say. He was the guy that implemented the pandemic measures for 2 years.
Jordan Peterson said, I don't think he's ever said anything that's true.
I don't want to...
or not true, honest, or something like that.
Yeah. No, Jordan Peterson did say something like that. But the thing is, I don't want to say I understand Trudeau.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of factors that go into a human being.
Yes.
So one thing that gets passed around a lot is his admiration of China. I have talked about my admirations of China's dictatorship. That doesn't mean it's something I want for my country.
Yeah.
It's just, wow, this is a very effective method for getting things done.
I mean, I don't know. The fictional character Veshinari.
Yeah. But you don't need a fiction. You can look at China.
Yeah.
Their 5-year plans, they had air you couldn't breathe. Until like 5 years ago. Yeah. Then they're like, enough is enough. They stopped the coal. They switched to nuclear and solar, and now they're the leading solar country in the world. Just like that. It's amazing what China can do.
Right. Yeah.
Australia can do this as well. They were like any other country on Earth, and then they're like, "Hey, we have a new law. You can only use LED light bulbs. All compact fluorescents are banned." Suddenly, their energy consumption went way down, and then they're like, "Okay, we're going to put in a battery grid bigger than anything in the world by far."
Yeah.
They put it in. Bam. Now they don't have peak load problems. Australia has incredible powers to pivot their country at any point. China has the same thing. They can pivot their country to a bright new future instantly.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The problem with that pivotal power is you can pivot your country into disaster and tyranny instantly as well, which China and Australia have both done.
Both those things lead to massive corruption.
Potential for, yes.
Yeah, no, China has ridiculous amounts of corruption.
That's the problem with unlimited power, is you can do unlimited good, but you can also do infinite evil, basically.
Yeah, well, you know about the very quickly set up Olympic housing?
No.
So China is for the Olympians. They made this massive complex very fast. And so all the Olympians could be in it. It all flooded because all the piping burst because the contractors didn't put it together right because they did it slapdash quick and wanted to get away with money.
Right,
and
yeah. So that's...
And this constantly happens in Chinese buildings as they flood.
And that's the power of, I guess, pushing through regulations to an extent. And like with their Yellow River Dam, which killed like 10,000 people or more or something. Yeah. It was horrible because they were able to put up this giant dam like the world had never seen. But it also didn't work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I failed on that aspect. So when I was in the shower and I was thinking, like, you can be a victim or you can be strong. Yeah. And I was thinking, there's no one I can turn to. Like, I'm trying to find all these people to give me, like, just, it's okay. And I thought, you know what I can do? I can't find anyone to be the support I need right now. Yeah. So why don't I become the support for everyone else? Because the support doesn't exist, obviously. Yeah. And I'm not saying I'm going to, like, become, like, this messianic figure that tells all Canadians it's okay if listen to me, follow me. What I'm saying is, if in my own life, like you said, I just try to make my own life the little corner of paradise, everything can flow from there. Because the power of an individual leading a righteous life cannot be understated. Because what happens is people say, I wish I was like that guy. Like, he just seems happy. He's got his life together. Yeah. And so they start being like you. And that spreads. And then what happens is those people have friends and family. Those people are in the government. They change. And suddenly, the government's not the problem it was. And you didn't have to do anything but live your own life righteously. So what's interesting is I came up with this idea of, okay, so the thing to do is not to panic, not to feel sick, not to worry. Yeah. First of all, it's to take strength for myself, to take responsibility for myself. Yeah. Which is massively powerful. Like right there, it's like, I'm going to be the pillar of strength. I don't need someone to lean on. I will be the pillar of strength.
Very Aurelian.
And that alone...
Or Marcusian.
Gave me what I needed. Yeah. Which is kind of remarkable. But then I decided, and the way I will be this pillar of strength for myself and for others is just to keep living my life in the best way I know how, honestly. So what that means is you're like an icebreaker. You go through clear waters, you're an icebreaker. You go through ice, you're an icebreaker, and the ice breaks. Yeah. You don't weave through the ice. You go through. So what that means is I will not change what I consider as righteous. Now, what I consider righteous will change, but I will not change the fact that I keep doing what I consider to be righteous. Yeah. I will change what I do because what I consider to be righteous will change. But I will keep doing righteousness no matter the outside force, which means if the laws loop around to restrict my righteous behavior, I will ignore them. Yeah. And if they are so great that it allows me to do whatever I want, I will ignore that freedom to the extent that it leads me away from the righteous path. Yeah. I don't care what amount of freedom the government gives me or the amount of restrictions it gives me. I will continue living righteously. And if that leads me to prison or if that leads me to great success or whatever else it might be, so be it. And that will change the world around me. And so that's what I came to. And then I learned about just recently. I heard you got a lot of papers, so I
had to one me up.
So I heard about this guy called Václav Havel, who was a Czechoslovakian dissident while they were under communist rule. Yeah. And he later became the president of Czechoslovakia after the communists were overthrown. Yeah. So he was against communism. And what he said was that he found, and this is a guy with experience, the most powerful way to combat totalitarianism was something he called parallel structures. And what those were organizations, businesses, institutions, technologies, or creative pursuits, which existed physically within society, obviously, because you have to live within the society. Well, you don't have to live within society. You can have a revolution. Mm-hmm. But he said, no, the most powerful thing was parallel structures, which existed within society, businesses, institutions, technologies, creative pursuits, but morally outside of it. Mm. So it's like, I will keep doing the moral thing no matter what society tells me to do, but I am not going to live outside of society. I'm going to live within society. And he said this was more powerful than taking political action directly against the state. It was more powerful to just to live a good life. Yeah. Let that change everyone around you and build your own community. Because what he said happened eventually was everyone starts joining your community of people living in this parallel structure to society. And suddenly the only people in the other parallel structure of the tyrannical totalitarian government are a couple losers who, in theory, have all the power, but nobody listens to them, and they're a minority that can't reinforce anything.
Yeah.
Like the Canadian government, this has actually very disappointed me. Even if they had given orders to shoot all the citizens that were protesting, let's say.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. Like someone like what's the chair of the WEF called? I forgot his name. The World Economic Forum leader guy.
Klaus Schwab.
Yeah, Klaus Schwab. You might think, we're powerless, we're hopeless. This dude has control over the world, let's say. Mm-hmm. Sure, maybe he's the ruler of Earth. But if his soldiers won't pull the trigger, he can do nothing.
Also, I do have this thought on the, we're going to implement this cashless society and it's all going to be this virtual money. People will
barter.
Bartering people will just make a new currency.
Yeah, they'll make their own money. Now, the most concerning thing about automation is if you get automatic trucks, then the truckers don't have any power. If you get automatic farming, the farmers don't have any power. If you get automatic soldiers, the individual choice of the soldiers doesn't matter anymore. And then you don't... So automation doesn't allow for democracy. Because democracy works because every part is important. Yeah. And so if you do something that the farmers hate, they stop and then you have to change. If you do something that the soldiers hate, you can't enforce your laws. But once you automate things, a single person is allowed to... So I don't think... It's a very weird thought, but I don't think automation can exist within a democracy.
Yeah.
And something else we didn't touch on... Well, sorry, no. That's funny. Something that reinforces what we were talking about. The guy who wrote this didn't touch on. That's what confused me. This is someone called A Fox, just a YouTube comment. Yeah. And it's one of the most insightful YouTube comments I've ever read. Which is... So how does this happen? Like, because we don't have the automation right now, right? Yeah. So why aren't these people just not listening to what the government says? Why are they allowing this tyranny to continue? And I think it is because they consider themselves to be victims of some sort, and the government is their parent that'll take care of them. And there was a very, very telling the Wyatt's World here, which is annoying political comics.
Yeah.
It was a masterpiece that he created it, but for the entirely reasons he didn't intend.
That's several of his things.
Which is a bunch of... It's to make fun of vaccine mandate people. Yeah. And they're saying, but I don't want to go to bed. I want to stay up late. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, we're doing it for your own good. Listen to the adults, right? Yeah. So what he's done is he's equated the populace with children.
Yeah.
He said, you aren't adults. You're all children. Mm-hmm. We are all children that need to be protected by the all benevolent government parental figure. Yeah.
There's actually a thing called the parent state.
But what... Are we not adults? Do we not get to make our own decisions?
The nanny state, that's it.
Like, what is... So he is saying, oh, look, these people are so unreasonable. They're like a kid that doesn't want to eat their vegetables.
Yeah.
But these aren't children. Mm-hmm. You have made a very, very telling false equivalence that you view people as children to be controlled, not as individuals capable of self-determination. And that... I think that is what the... when Jordan Peterson talks about how the NDP, they don't love the poor, they hate the rich. I think that is a very similar idea of we are victims, we need to be protected. Mm-hmm. We hate you because you are free and you are powerful. We want to pull you down to our level. Like the French system that people don't want because it's not fair. Yeah. It's like we will pull you all down to our own level so we all suffer equally together instead of at least allowing those who are able to claw through the mud. And the thing is, right, in the French system, let's say you're just some poor nobody and you get a horrible to expensive disease, right? If you're a good person, you are going to find so much support.
Yeah.
People, like, there will be a random millionaire who'll be like, I love this guy. I've never met him, but I've just seen what he does. He's the center of this community. I'm going to pay for his treatment. No problem. Yeah. But these parasites on society, right? Like the Jews. Why I say that is because I realized the language I just used there.
Yeah.
But they think that in a society where you have to have value in order to survive, I will be the one that suffers. So they consider themselves worthless. They consider themselves to be friendless, useless, feckless. They consider themselves to have no value, that people will want to sustain them, to help them keep their lives going. Otherwise, they wouldn't worry about the fact that you might need some extra help to get the best help possible. So what this guy said was, why put effort into trying to thrive in an unfair world when you could instead put all your extremely valuable time and effort into fighting things that you think are keeping you from thriving? So, and this is something I talked about, but I don't know if I resonated on the same level of this when I was talking about my resentment for everything. Yeah. It's like, why should I try to make my life better? Get rid of my anxiety, get rid of my stress, get rid of my anger, resentment, stress, whatever it might be. When instead I can put all my energy into saying, oh man, if this guy didn't keep telling me to do this for him, and if this guy didn't keep telling me to do this for him, then I would be so good. And so I put all my effort into railing against these people, trying to eliminate them from my world, and like, oh, I'll just once I'm able to, but it's like, no, just try to be a better person. Don't worry, like all those so you have extremely valuable time and energy, and you can either put it into thriving in an unfair world. The world is unfair, but you can put that energy into fighting against the unfairness all the same. You can't get rid. So you can work really hard so that you do well in an unfair world. Yeah. Or you can rail against the unfairness itself, and you will never succeed. Yeah. And that will, and not only will you not succeed, you will be actively hurting yourself, because you will be blaming the unfairness for all your failures, when your real failure was not trying to succeede in the first place.
Well, so this is all really exemplified in something I saw in Political Compass memes. It's a little bit different now, but it talks about like equity, all those things. And it's this comic that someone made. So it shows a tree, and the tree's leaning over, has apples. And there's a kid on either side of the tree. And an apple falls to the one kid because it's leading in that direction. This is like, oh, this is just the open market or whatever. And then both of them are on ladders of equal height, and they're collecting apples. But the one kid can't reach the tree because it's leaning over. The other one's gathering up apples. And then it has, the one kid has his ladder, and the other kid has a taller ladder. And so, and I think that's meant to be equity or something. Yeah. And so you can like get the apples on either side. And then the final one shows they've like pulled the tree over, so there's like sticks shoved up underneath it, and there's like rope tied to it, and it's pulled over, so it's like balanced out, and their ladders are equal height, so they can both work. Yeah. Then the comments are, idiot kid, why didn't you just go to the other side of the tree with the other one? And like, well, why don't they both just be on that side of the tree that's leaning over instead of all that ridiculous work?
There's another equity versus equality comic where it shows people not being able to look over a fence.
The boxes.
Yeah. But I've seen it pointed out that, no, an equity system would be you dig a hole for the tallest guy. Yeah. And the kid that stands on the ground at the same height, and neither can see over the fence. Yeah. Yeah.
Government controls your dreams anyways. Shall I tell you about my fever dream I had?
Not just yet. I need to go to the bathroom. Okay. So
yeah, I was thinking we can split this into.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
This is related but different. So.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. So I'll just put a break here for a second. So yeah, I've decided that the way to counter the mistake I made with the despair about the government and the pain and the trouble sleeping is, and it has worked. This isn't just like an idea. Like I feel fine now, weirdly. But it's just to live your life to the best of its capabilities, no matter what the dictators say, essentially, and then the world changes around you, or it doesn't. But either way, you've done your best.
Your gulag's going to be the hoppiest his gulag in the whole gulag system.
Yeah, well,
that is actually Solzhenitsyn, what he did in the Gulag Archipelago. He had one of the better gulags to live in, even though it was horrible, because that man was such strong character that he made everyone better around him.
Yeah, and I mean, what's the other option? That you compromise on everything that made life worth living in the first place anyways? So you live without value, or you have troubles living with value. And it seems pretty obvious that you prefer the troubles. Because it's like, if you can't win with principles, then you can't win at all. Yeah. Because if you abandon your principles to win, no victory has been won. Yeah. So yeah, if you're concerned about your government's tyranny and whatnot, just keep living. Just live your best life.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah. And, yeah. We'll be right back after these messages, sort of, but in like 2 weeks.
Yeah.